Well, hello, everyone. My name is Shuso Brad, and I'm one of the priests at the Dragonfly Sangha. And this evening, I'd like to continue our series of reflections on the Buddha's words, specifically on the Eightfold Path. Now, as Sensei Tony and Shuso Mike had discussed, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path were part of the Buddha's first sermon at Deer Park after he was woken up. And it was very diagnostic in its nature. We all suffer. Here's why we suffer, and here's what we can do to not suffer or suffer less. And so he offered the Four Noble Truths and then the path to suffer less, the Noble Eightfold Path. And we use that word noble a lot. And oftentimes we refer to Buddhism as living nobly in the midst of suffering. Because here's the thing, we do a lot of things on a daily basis. We think, we speak, we act, we earn a living, we contemplate and dwell on things, we plan. And what the Buddha wanted to do was give us a way to think about doing those things the right way, so that we relieve suffering in ourselves and in other people. And right, as Sensei Tony and Shuzo Mike have pointed out, is not a, here's your checklist of things the only way that you can do it, right? It's more right as in leading to happiness for ourselves and for other people. What's most helpful or useful. So right means what is best in the moment. So what's the right key for that lock, or the right clothes for the weather, because it's hot today or it's cold today. And so I'd like to talk a bit about right speech. And from the perspectives of the Three Principles of Oneness, right speech is considered compassionate action. So how can we practice right speech? Well, first off, speech is a big part of our lives. Speech is when we start to externalize a lot of the stuff that's inside us. And we oftentimes interact with the world in a very vocal way, right? And the thing about speech is that it's not just something that we're keeping to ourselves. There's an implied listener involved with speech. It's communication happening between you and one or more people. And so we need to think about our speech as something that we're giving to other people, like a gift. So it's the quality of that gift. And I spoke a few weeks ago about how our lives are like incense, right? Because we're all burning. Are we going to give off a sweet smell or one that's not so sweet? And our speech is part of that aroma of our personal incense that we give off. Now, right speech is traditionally meant refraining from four types of speech. So, false speech, speech that is divisive, harsh, and idle. And so I'd like to talk briefly about each of those. So, the first one, false speech. This is telling lies. Right? And our goal as practitioners is to relieve suffering by cutting through delusion. So seeing things as they really are. Right? And when we lie, we introduce delusion. We delude ourselves. We delude others. So we need to make sure that we're avoiding that. And here's the thing. We've all told lies in the past. Big ones, small ones. I know for me, when I was younger, I always had a habit. If someone would say, hey, did you see that movie? Did you read that book? Have you been to that place? Have you seen this show? And I say, oh, yeah. Who hasn't, right? And then I would just clench. And I'd hope that they don't, ask for more detail. Because I was saying it to, be involved, be included. And say, oh, yeah, I'm one of the people that does that thing, that's been to that place, right? Of course. And oftentimes we tell lies, even small ones, because we want to keep alive a certain story about ourselves, that we're someone who has it all or knows it all, someone who belongs to a certain group, right? Here's the thing, lies are really tricky because they add to more lies. They proliferate very, very quickly because we find that we need to lie to cover up that other lie, or lie to keep that other lie going, and tell 15 more lies. And it's very easy to lose track of the truth. And because everything that, we know about the world comes through our minds, we can start to forget what's true if we get into that habit of lying so often. So to speak in a way that relieves suffering, we want to be honest. We want to create clarity. We want to be known as someone who is trustworthy and who people can talk to because we're honest. We tell the truth. The second kind of speech we want to refrain from is divisive speech. So this is slander, rumors, spreading disunity or disharmony between people. Oftentimes this involves tearing people down so that we look better. Or like I said, spreading rumors about people. And despite that sounding like really heavy stuff, like, oh, I'm not going to do that, it's surprisingly easy to find yourself in a situation where you might be tempted. Say you're hanging out with a group of friends or a group of coworkers, and they're all talking about one coworker, like, that person over there, they always do that thing, right? They do that thing, and that really annoys me, right? Oh man, yeah, I remember when they did that to me. That was awful. Gross, right? And we pile on. We add, again, from that sense of, well, I want to belong. I want to be part of this group. I want to ingratiate myself to these people. So I'm going to dislike the same people that they dislike. And I'm just going to add on to that fire, right? And it can be really tricky. We find ourselves in those kinds of situations. But what we want to do from a position of relieving suffering is we want to speak in a way that encourages empathy and connection, and oneness, right? Because we have a lot more in common than we do things that separate us. And so in that situation, we might want to say, if we do speak up, we might want to advocate, for the person. Like, I know they've had a lot on their plate. So it might just be that they've been really busy. I know me, when I'm in a situation where I'm under a lot of stress, I don't always show up in the best way, right? So we have that connection with the people, or seek to understand. Say, why do you feel that way? Why are you saying that about that person? Or the right thing in that situation might be to not say anything, and by your presence, you are not feeding in to that divisive speech and adding to the suffering. The third type of speech that the Buddha asks us to avoid is harsh speech. So these are things like insults or abusive speech, or using sarcasm, being impolite and rude, right? And sometimes people justify harsh speech as, well, I'm sticking up for a good cause, right? I'm gonna yell at these people because they're the bad guy and they're hurting this group, or they're hurting this person. But the problem is, when we advocate for people in a harsh way, we wind up sort of stirring the pot, so to speak, and we wind up hurting the cause, because now suddenly people think, oh, well, everyone who believes that behaves like this, right? So it's a fine line, and we need to ask ourselves, am I speaking harshly in this situation because I truly am upset about what's going on, or am I just angry at that other person or that group, and I have to be heard? I have to say something, and I'm going to make them pay with these hurtful words. Now, there can be abrasive ways of speaking that, look, if a kid is reaching for a hot burner, we may not be able to, oh, honey, you want to be very careful not to touch the hot burner, right? No, you're going to yell. You're going to say, oh, no, stop. Don't touch that, right? So there are times where maybe we need to be harsh, or we need to be loud. And Shuzo Mike talked 2 weeks ago about upaya, or skillful means, right? It's doing things that are right for the situation. Right, so there might be times where we need to use a certain kind of language skillfully to get through to people. But again, it's about that intention. And be careful that your intention is not to cause harm in that situation by using angry speech. And again, in the spirit and practice of relieving suffering, our speech should be calming. We should be a kind presence, welcoming to people, as opposed to making people feel like, oh, he kind of blows up pretty often. I don't know if I'm really comfortable going up to him. People should feel comfortable approaching us and not turned off by our language. And the fourth thing that we should avoid is idle chatter, or useless gossip and filler speech. As I was preparing for this talk, I saw a monk who shared the Pali word for idle chatter, and is sampa palapa, right? Sampa palapa, and he said it's like blah blah blah. So this is the blah 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 speech that we should avoid, right? This is when we're communicating nothing of value. It's mindless speech that's just filling a silence, or it's keeping the attention on us. Oh yeah, me too. I need to add into this conversation. I don't really have anything useful to add, but I'm gonna talk anyway. And here's the thing, you might think, the weather, talking about sports and things like that. Like, is that mindless chatter? Should I avoid that? It might be. But at the same time, if you are building a connection and a relationship with someone over that speech, then that can be very useful, and that's okay. But if you find that you're, just talking for the sake of talking, you're talking because you don't like it being quiet, and you're trying to fill that silence, and the talk is exhausting you, maybe it's not very useful speech. If it's energizing and engaging a speech, then it might be much more useful. But oftentimes idle chatter comes from, feeling like, I gotta look like I'm a part of this group. So I'm just going to say something so I'm heard, so that people will look at me and focus on me and hear what I'm saying. Right. So to kind of repeat, the four types of speech that we should avoid in this teaching of right speech is false, divisive, harsh, and idle. Now, there's another part of right speech, just sort of like the flip side, right? We said that speech is a two-way thing. There's a communicator, and then there's a listener. And likewise, your practice of right speech can include right listening. And again, to kind of build on idle chatter, a lot of times we're offering opinions in situations where we don't have all the information. And so we feel compelled to just talk and talk and talk. And so listening is a great way for us to learn more about the person we're talking to, the situation where we feel compelled to speak. And a few years ago, I think about 20 years ago, Thich Nhat Hanh wrote a book, The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching, where he shares just, a lot of the fundamental teachings of Buddhism. And he talks about right speech. And in there, he talks about how listening is an essential part. To quote Thich Nhat Hanh actually in his book, deep listening is the foundation of right speech. If we cannot listen mindfully, we cannot practice right speech. Because no matter what we say, it will not be mindful, because we'll be speaking only our own ideas and not in response to the other person. So again, speech implies a listener, there's a communicator, or there's a communication going on two ways. And in our order, we practice three clear precepts. Right? There's not knowing, bearing witness, and taking action. And listening is a big part of that. Because we need to be okay going into situations and recognizing, like, I don't know. Right? I don't know what's going on. Hey, have you seen this movie? No, I haven't. Tell me about it. Should I watch it? Is it great? Have you been to this place? No, I haven't. I don't need to lie and say, oh yeah, yeah, I have. But be okay with not knowing, and then bear witness. Maybe you feel like, oh, I heard just enough of this situation. This person seems like a bad person. I'm going to pile on to the rumor mill and spread that information along. Hold on. Maybe you don't know. And then bear witness to learn and listen and find out more about that situation and determine what the right action and right words may be. Because again, right speech, it's not just about the things that you say, but it's also about the things that you're hearing. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. There's a lot of ways to get information, and you want to be careful that you're not surrounding yourself with words that will influence you to say the wrong things and do the wrong things. Now, certainly, there's wrong speech in the world. Hopefully, we're not contributing a lot of it, but there is wrong speech in the world. And we can't eliminate that from everybody. We can really only, moderate our own speaking, but we should also be mindful of the kind of speech that we constantly listen to, right? Don't always be listening to angry words and things like that, because it will rub off on you. So you want to be mindful of what you're listening to, in addition to what you're saying. So, we talked a bit about right speech and the 4 things that we shouldn't say, and they were taught sort of from the negative perspective, like here's what you shouldn't do. But if we kind of reframe those as things we should do, we see that the practice of right speech encourages us to say what's true, to speak in ways that bring people together rather than divide and isolate them. So come from speak from a place of oneness as opposed to separateness. Use a tone that is gentle and caring and kind. And speak mindfully so that we're saying things that are intentional and helpful to people. And as a part of your practice, right speech is also a great opportunity for you to learn. Because look, we're not perfect. There are going to be times where we're going to use wrong speech. Okay? And in those situations, we want to find out why we did it. I know in times where I've spoken out in anger, I feel that in my body. I feel a tension, right? My heart rate goes up. My breathing is faster. I go into that fight or flight mode. Like my body feels that anger. It's uncomfortable. So when we do speak wrong, right? If we tell a lie or we speak, we feed into the rumor mill, we use harsh speech, or we're just, blah, 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 right? Notice what's going on in your body and then identify the emotions and the thoughts that encouraged you to say those things. And oftentimes what we'll find is when we speak out of anger or we tell lies, or we're spreading rumors, we're doing it from a place of selfishness and defense, right? And fear. Because we're like, well, I have to keep this story going, this narrative going where, I'm on top, right? The other person's wrong and I'm the person who's right. And I have this and I'm cool and I'm funny and I'm all of these things, right? Because oftentimes we found ourselves trapped by this notion of, well, my value comes from the things that I do and the things that I have, as opposed to who I am. Right? And in the 4 Directions teaching, we have the model of esteem versus confidence, or being versus doing and having, or the true self versus the ego self. And we get really caught up with the ego self and letting the ego self kind of take the reins, right? Rather than letting our true self, our Buddha nature, manifest in our words and in our actions. And so wrong speech gives us an opportunity to learn. Say, why did I say that? Why did I say that the way that I said that? And you identify that emotion or that thought. And then you can ask the 4 questions. So what isn't true about that thought? What belief is causing this? Is it that I'm letting the ego sort of run things as opposed to letting my true self, my Buddha nature, come out in my words? Has anyone else been in a similar situation, right? Recognize that oneness. And what can I do differently? What creative action can I take as a result of what I've learned here? Now, the last thing that I wanted to talk about was, speaking sort of digitally, right? Because while the Buddha's teachings are timeless, and the Eightfold Path is just as useful now as it was, 2,600 years ago, there are applications of some of these teachings that are a bit newer. And so technology has made our ability to speak, the volume and the scope and reach of the things that we say is so much bigger now than it was back then. We don't have to be in person. We have social media. So we can post things out to big groups of people and they stay there for years and years and years, as long as the computers keep running, right? So we need to be very mindful of what we say. Because if we hurt someone one-on-one, if we say something to someone and it makes them upset, we can apologize and we can make that right. But in social media, our words get frozen. And people will come back and visit those words and assume that, well, you still feel that way, right? It's like carrying around a little signboard that says, hey, here's what I thought, June 2009, and I still think that today. It's not necessarily true, though, right? So you need to be very careful of the things that you say, and be very mindful and skillful, and make sure that those things are useful, because it's not the same. People will assume that you're always there saying that thing to them every time they read it. So I wanted to offer 5 things that you should consider, that we should consider when we use social media to ensure that we're speaking from a place of compassionate action. And this ties in very closely with the parts of right speech. So the first one, is it true? Ask yourself, is what I'm going to post true? Is it factual? Is it based on facts? Next, is it helpful? Is it beneficial to everyone? Third, is it kind? Is it grounded in goodwill and a good intention? Next, is it pleasant to hear? Is it endearing? Will it endear people to you? Is it gentle? And then lastly, is it timely? And is it appropriate in the moment? Because remember, right speech is not, here's some stuff I can say and I can always say it because it's right speech. Is it right for the moment? Is it the right jacket for the weather? Right? Is it the right time to say that thing? And you may think, you know what? Yep, I'm spitting truth. It's, this person needs to hear it. I'm going to be as gentle as I can. And my intention is to help that person. But ask yourself, is the person ready to hear it? Have you built the connection with this person that it's appropriate to say to them, and that they'd be able to hear it with the spirit that you intend to say it? And that may not be true. And you might need to reach out to that person in a different spirit, one of inquiry and learning and not knowing, as opposed to declaration and teaching, right? And that's hard to do. Because again, we come to these situations a lot of times with like, well, yeah, I'm doing this for the right reasons. But ask yourself, is that your intention? And is now the right time? So is it true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? Is it pleasant? And is it timely? And remember too, there's a sixth thing, or there's another option in a situation like this. You don't have to say something. Don't think that you always have to put words out there. That is, if you don't have anything useful or helpful to offer, it's okay to stay silent. Because silence can also be noble and right. The right jacket for the weather, the right key for the lock. To say nothing. So, I hope that you have found this talk useful. And as always, if you want to learn more about our practice or would like someone to talk to, You can visit us at AskSenseiTony.com. But I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and thank you for your time today.